What's up everybody, welcome to FoundFlix, and as you can see, FoundFlix Video is back in business. Since we're already deep into the spooky season, it is time once more for another list of my picks that are perfect for Halloween. This time I did things a bit differently, and put together kind of double features of movies that I feel work together well. So there's obviously a lot of pretty standard choices like Trick or Treat, Halloween, Hocus Pocus, stuff like that, many staples that are mandatory to watch each year. The intent with this list is to provide a more eclectic selection of different flavors of horror, and while they aren't necessarily the most obscure, there is a wide range of different kinds of movies on display here. Naturally, we kick things off with a pair of radical 80s flicks that are some of my all-time faves. Night of the Demons has a pretty typical setup, with a bunch of dumbass kids doing dumbass stuff. In this case, deciding to have a Halloween party at a haunted house. The style and tone of this one is just that perfect balance of spooky and goofy that is right in my Q zone, and ideal for Halloween. It's got everything you'd want in an 80s horror flick, and actually boasts some impressive performances, namely from our lead Angela, Amelia Kincaid. The strobe light dance sequence is nuts, and Scream Queen Linnea Quigley is there doing her thing too, with one especially notable gore scene that will make you look at lipstick going into a nipple in a whole new way. Not that that's something you would ever think about in the first place. There's something wrong with you, I don't know. A loose adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's works, RE-ANIMATOR is incredibly memorable and rewatchable. I don't even know how many times I've seen this thing. We follow young and overzealous med student Herbert West as he does increasingly disturbing and dangerous experiments to bring the dead back to life. Director Stuart Gordon is known to do some pretty bizarre stuff, and that is definitely on display here. Probably the most insane being a part with the professor's disembodied head with little wings on it that let him fly around. Just weird. This one is chock full of gooey gore and a weird dark humor that is really enhanced by the one and only Jeffrey Combs. All three in the series are good, but nothing beats the first. Our next selections are quite different from each other, but both succeed in being extremely atmospheric and just plain creepy. Again, atmosphere is the name of the game with John Carpenter's underrated The Fog. While not quite at the level of some of his other works, and the Ghost Pirates are maybe a little bit goofy, the atmosphere in this one is second to none. Taking place in a small seaside town, there's just something about it that makes the whole thing extra spooky throughout. This also thanks to Carpenter's frequent DP collaborator, my boy Dean Cundy, and they craft a very different vibe than that of Haddonfield. Speaking of, this reunites Carpenter with Jamie Lee Curtis, now teaming up in an admittedly slightly uncomfortable romance with the mustache legend Tom Atkins. Ickiness aside, it's still a fun novelty seeing them share the screen. Another small town set supernatural flick dripping with atmosphere, this time set in the ancient witch-infested town of Salem. The Lords of Salem really took me by surprise the first time I saw it. Confession, I am not really a fan of Rob Zombie's. I didn't mind House of a Thousand Corpses, but that's about it. However, I don't think even the biggest fan of his work would argue that his movies are for everyone. So I was genuinely shocked when I finally watched this, and I kinda loved it. It does bear many of Zombie's trademarks of his grindhouse-influenced style, but this feels much more mature than normal, more akin to something like a 70s British psychological thriller. And you know, his wife has gotta be in everything. Also, shockingly, this is her best performance to me by far, because she's playing like a normal person instead of a sexed up weirdo as usual. It is a definitely refreshing change for both of them, which apparently is everyone's least favorite of his movies, so maybe that explains why I actually like it. Italian horror is made of a huge range of different subgenres, perhaps most notably giallo of the 60s and 70s. However, I decided to showcase two very different times. The 90s, typically considered a low point for horror, and Master Fulci's most revered film. CEMETARY MAN, or its original title, Della Morte dell'Amore, is a very unique, almost artsy take on a zombie film. The title means love and death, and that certainly describes this rumination on the subject. It's also notable for starring Rupert Everett, who is awesome as always, playing a lonely guardian of a cemetery in a small Italian village, where for some reason corpses rise from their graves every night and he has to destroy them. His life takes a turn when he falls in love with a gorgeous widow who becomes the undead after they make love on her husband's grave. As you can imagine, things spiral even further out of control from here. Then his weird mute assistant guy falls for a lady decapitated in a motorcycle accident. Yeah, it's a lot, but I really dig this one. Again, just very unique and bizarre in every aspect. That is a cult classic in my book. While this is technically kind of also a zombie movie, it feels completely different in every regard than our previous entry. The The inclusion of the Beyond is more to act as an introduction to director Fulci, as this is probably his best film. A seemingly psychic-powered young woman moves into a hotel very inconveniently positioned over a gate to hell. Soon after, bloody murders start occurring, and it's up to Lisa to solve the mystery at hand. A lot of Italian horror at the time can be pretty schlocky, and the Beyond elevates itself in a lot of ways above that. Or at least it gets really close. It is very over-the-top gore-wise, always a plus, but some of the special effects and stuff are certainly cheesy by today's standards, but for me, that actually adds to the experience. I always found this one especially scary too. So with a nice visual style and plenty of blood to go around, with the Beyond, you've got a good time on your hands. Many times, comedy and horror go hand in hand, and the next two illustrate this perfectly. They've got plenty of scares and gore, but are also absolutely hysterical. Vicious Fun is a more than accurate name for this clever and most amusing romp. Steeped in many references to 80s horror, a young writer stumbles into a meeting of serial killers in the back room of a Chinese restaurant after a long night of drinking. We've all been there, right? Initially, he tries to blend in amongst them, but things quickly go completely off the rails after his true identity is revealed, and the others will do anything to stop him for good. This is first and foremost absolutely hilarious to me via the dialogue and distinct characters. David Koechner is always a welcome sight, but really it's Ari Millen that steals the show with his very Patrick Bateman-inspired killer. Seriously, this dude was making me crack up with every single one of his particular mannerisms and delivery. But it's not just him that makes this a success, as the plot clips along with a breakneck pace and many twists and surprising turns throughout. This manages to stay a pretty fun and exciting ride the entire time. In the apocalyptic comedy This Is the End, Seth Rogen and his old buddies Franco, Danny McBride, and Jay Baruchel, along with many others, play real-life exaggerated versions of themselves, and if you're a fan of their style at all, I promise you will dig this one. Especially as it's the most horror-centric of all their movies. I mean, Satan even hangs dong! What else do you need, you know? You kind of have to dig their particular stoner, juvenile vibe to appreciate this, but where it truly excels is the surprising and varied celebrities that pop up to varying degrees, and it adds a whole other layer of extra surprise and hilarity to the whole thing. In particular, the first 20 minutes or so is busting with so many characters done in many surprising ways. Amongst the madness, Michael Cera stands out in particular, going around asking everyone to snort some coke off his boner. He is amazing in this. It does lose some momentum when the main plot kicks off with a kind of rapture event, and the boys have to learn how to not be self-absorbed assholes. Yeah, good luck with that. Of course, don't forget about the kids! Sometimes you just want to watch something that isn't so hardcore, and while these two are definitely not going to cause many nightmares, they're still both excellent. So what if they're made for kids? Time to get them started with some good old gateway horror. I may be biased about the recent adaptation of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark because I kinda grew up on those books, but while certainly leaning more towards kids or young adults, this is still pretty scary, and I think the movie did a great job bringing the stories to life, and perhaps even more importantly, the ghastly images that accompanied them. These characters are pretty iconic, so it's an impressive feat to pull off, but they also kind of balance that line very well between kid-friendly and actually scary, because it honestly has some kind of scary stuff, like when the pale lady eats that one guy. I was like, what the hell, man, that is weird. And again, really pushing that boundary in a pleasing way. I also like the new guy, Mr. Jangly Bones, and how the story spilled out into the real world. It's in its overwrapping story that the film suffers a bit, but each segment is strong enough for me to make the whole thing worth it. The second film from stop-motion powerhouse Laika, Paranorman is a top-notch dark fantasy comedy horror film that also mines the small-town Halloween vibes quite well. Unlike Salem, this is set in a fictional Massachusetts town where a young boy Norman who can see ghosts is sent on a journey to end a several hundred-year-old witch's curse that plagues the town's history. Kinda like Pixar, all of Laika's movies visually are always a groundbreaking display of what you can do with stop-motion animation nowadays, and this results in consistently stunning, impressive displays purely just in how it looks, along with appreciating the real craftsmanship poured into every single frame. All the movies are great, but the especially horror-focused Paranorman is perfect for Halloween. It's a lot of fun and also does have some pretty spooky moments with the freshly risen zombies, along with the witch at the center of the curse, which ends up having a weird kind of Silent Hill bend to things that was definitely unexpected. And it's got a nice message too. What else do you want from a kid's movie? Well, that wraps it up for this year's frightful double feature selections. Of course, there's tons of great horror flicks out there to watch for Halloween, and these are just a few of my faves that I ultimately find myself watching year after year. So what's your favorite pick from my list? And what are your go-to essentials for the season. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. Thanks for watching FoundFlix. See you next time. Stay safe and stay spooky.